Hi, you're here with Dr. Shannon Wong-Lerner, and this is The Intersection, Season 3, Episode 1. The Intersection Diverse Folks Converse is a podcast made by and for queer people of color, gender nonconforming, and trans people. And we're so happy to have with us Josh Paul. Josh Paul is previously and for the last decade served as the Director of Congressional and Public Affairs, Bureau of Political Military Affairs, U.S. Department of State, with responsibility for shaping and implementing a holistic communications strategy in support of U.S. security assistance, arms transfers, and global defense partnerships. Previously, Josh was a consultant for the U.S. and U.K. governments in Iraq and Palestine on institutional development and security sector governance. But Josh Paul is better known to the public as the State Department official who resigned in October in protest of the Biden administration increase of arms sales to Israel and upon its siege on Gaza. So happy to have you here, Josh Paul.
Thank you very much. It's great to join you, and I really value this opportunity to talk to you and to your audience.
Yeah, so this show, just to kind of give a segue, aims to show relationships that happen within the intersection of social justice and confronting systems of racism, homophobia and transphobia, sexism, xenophobia, ableism. But really, our intersection doesn't end there. It belongs also between host and guest, and between our social and political lives, our personal lives, and lived experience. So I had a lot of questions online and with people I was talking about. I was like, how does this connect? And it connects in many different ways. Trans people and Palestinians intersect just as your presence here does and mine as a gender nonconforming person. And so we will get to at some point in the show talking about bodily autonomy, bodily integrity, and integrity, which we know in the United States is an issue for trans people. And we've talked about that on the show already in relationship to the overturning of Roe and the effect that would have on LGBTQ and trans people, our healthcare, sexual rights, rights to privacy, and things like that. And we've seen that domino effect. So getting back to you, Josh Paul, and why I wanted you on the show, just as trans people here in the States and elsewhere are starting to lose and in jeopardy of our freedom of bodily autonomy for what we can do with our bodies and being treated respectfully and with integrity, we're seeing this mass siege right now. And we've seen in the last 2 months in Gaza, where it is on the brink, if not in the middle or the beginning of a humanitarian crisis. So I would love, I just wanted to do that as sort of an introduction. Yeah. And before, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think that's exactly right. And if I can add to that, I think there's a lot of intersectionality here that we can also talk about, of course, dehumanization, disempowerment, and ultimately sort of the civil rights context for all of these struggles.
And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on. It's been really wonderful for me to follow all of your press and to kind of see, the flowering of you talking about your experience with the State Department and why you made this decision to leave and go out into the public just to speak up about what was happening right now in Palestine.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm glad to have that discussion with you. I look forward to it.
So Josh and I talked about a month ago, and I just wanted to go over a few Gaza statistics right now. The latest death toll is almost at 20,000, and about 1,139 people were killed in Israel. The 20,000 is people who are Palestinians, and the much lower number is people who are killed in Israel since October, on October 7th. Of those almost 20,000 killed in Palestine, almost 8,000 are children, and more than 5,000 have been women. And this is not including West Bank, and this is not including the much higher numbers of people who have been injured and people who are missing. So what I would like to ask you, just to get us kicked off, is if you could give us a quick synopsis of your public resignation from the State Department and the situation that caused you to resign.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I used to work in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs at the State Department, and this is the part of the department that is responsible for America's defense diplomacy. So security cooperation with other countries, security assistance, and arms transfers. It's interesting. I think if you ask most people on the street, they'd say if you're talking about arms transfers, well, that's Department of Defense. But actually, the US cites that function within the State Department, and they do so on the theory, I think the correct theory, that these sorts of relationships are ultimately tools of foreign policy. When we provide assistance to another country in the military sphere, when we build the capability of another country in its defense forces, those give us leverage with partners, and they also change the world. They shift balances of power, and so they are ultimately tools of foreign policy, and that's why it's in State Department and specifically in the bureau in which I used to work. So I was there for about 11 years. My main focus was on, first of all, managing the Bureau's relationship with Congress, which is important, of course, because Congress provides us the military assistance, the grant assistance. We're talking about over $7 billion a year in a typical year that we use to help countries that can't afford, we'll get that, but to help countries buy American material. And also is responsible for we have to notify Congress of all major arms transfers. So sort of getting Congress to support our major arms sales was also part of my job, in which capacity I also had to review and approve all pending major arms sales. I resigned the week of October 18th because I didn't feel that it was ever appropriate for us to be providing arms into a situation where we know that they are going to be used to cause massive civilian casualties, massive civilian harm. And already by October 18th, that was what was happening. I think already at that point, over 2,000 civilians have been killed in Gaza. And there was no sign then, as there is not now, of any slackening, of any lessening of the violence. I also resigned because I felt that the policies that we had been pursuing for the last decades, really, had not been working. Was intended to provide security to Israel on the basis that Israel would then feel it could make the concessions to Palestinians necessary to achieve a two-state solution, to achieve peace and security for Israelis. And as we saw on October 7th, the last few decades have not led to peace or security for Israelis either. So it was a moribund policy. And then combining both of those, when I tried to raise these concerns as sort of there was this rush to get arms out of the door, essentially, to get lethal arms into Israel, there was no space for this discussion. The department didn't want to hear it. The focus was entirely on moving weapons forward. And even in Congress, where there often is concern about human rights that are raised and discussed, there too, the push was just to move as quickly as we could on providing lethal arms. So for all of those reasons, I felt I had to, there was no space to discuss the issues within government, so the only space was outside of government. And to do that, I had to resign.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, even in terms of what is sort of, what is at the heart of our democracy and what it means to have dissent within the State Department, and also a sense of civil disobedience outside, and how that makes our democracy stronger. It seems like, perhaps that was one of the reasons why you left too, is this system that was in place, this checks and balances seem to be completely askew.
Yeah, that's right. It normally does work, to its credit. And one of the things I've really actually enjoyed in the last, decade is that relationship with Congress, where you go in there with, a potential arms transfer, for example, and you brief it to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, to the House Foreign Affairs Committee, behind closed doors. And more often than not, the tension that develops is not a partisan tension. It's not the Democrats on one side and the Republicans on the other. It's the executive on one side and Congress on the other. And it's always been fascinating to me to see sort of the checks and balances that are built into our system, really working the way they were designed to. Unfortunately, as I say, that's not the case when it comes to Israel. That seems to be a special case where there is unanimity across government in support of the current approach.
And I do want to get more into that later in our conversation and why you think that is happening. Before we go on, I'm old school. I have a paper letter of your resignation letter. And I told Josh right before we started that I had read parts of it, but I hadn't read it all the way through. When I read it all the way through, it really struck me why this resonated with so many people and why it did go viral. So I'm going to read a selection that I haven't heard read yet. because it has more to do with, perhaps like you talked about your passion for human rights, has more to do with that, right? So I'll go ahead. Those who know me best know that I have opinions and they are strong ones, but this is what is at the core of them, that there is beauty to be found everywhere in this world, and it deserves both protection and the right to flourish. And that is what I most desire for Palestinians and for Israelis. The murder of civilians is an enemy to that desire, whether by terrorists as they dance at a rave or by terrorists as they harvest their olive grove. The kidnapping of children is an enemy to that desire, whether taken at gunpoint from their kibbutz or taken at gunpoint from the village. And collective punishment is an enemy to that desire, whether it involves demolishing one home or 1,000, as to is ethnic cleansing, as to is occupation, as to is apartheid. It is my firm belief that in such conflicts, for those of us who are third parties, the side we must pick is not that of one of the combatants, but that of the people caught in the middle and that of the generations to come. So I thought this was just very poignant. I was struck by, I'd said to you before, the sort of like poetic nature of this letter and this selection that I chose in particular, just because it really takes someone to be very aware of their surroundings and to a certain amount of stillness to be able to get perspective on not just the job at hand, right? And that kind of, you had mentioned on one of your podcasts, is we're not here to have an emotional response to, the horrible tragedy of October 7th. And you had agreed too, like this is you said in the letter, monstrosity of monstrosities, but a response that owed the people that would be most involved, right, and affected, which would be civilian lives, the time and that kind of checks and balances that you weren't given. So, my question is, with this letter and the way that you've written it, is this sort of like a voice that you were allowed when you were in the State Department, or was it the shift that happened with what happened in Gaza that caused you to kind of like express yourself in this particular way?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. Regarding the letter itself, it's interesting you mention it and you frame it in that way, because it was something that actually took me a bit of time to write. I mean, I started writing it, several days after October 7th, but also, about a week before I actually decided to resign. And the way I did that, it was actually at the end of the workday, in the evening, sitting by myself, sort of thinking through things, frankly, pouring myself a glass of scotch and sort of, writing and then going back and editing. So it was a thoughtful process of the type that maybe you don't have the time in the sort of frenetic pace of work. That said, I think I've always felt that there has been space to raise difficult issues within the State Department. One of the benefits, I think, of the way the US government works is that there is sort of this tenured civil service. So there's a trial period once you go into government, normally a year, 6 months, whatever it might be. And after that, if you are on the civil service track, you have essentially protections where, workplace protections, where really you can only be fired for, malfeasance, illegal activity, absolute terrible negligence, whatever it might be. But within that, you are actually protected to be able to speak up and to raise your insights, to raise your concerns. And I took full advantage of that. I don't think everyone does. My motto was always, don't tell them, people will say to you, is that the hill you want to die on? And my motto was, take every hill, be willing to die on every hill, because you'd be surprised how few hills people are willing to kill you to take off of you. So I felt that there is that ability. Now, does that ability have an impact? I think that's a separate question. And I think there's a long discussion to be had there about how to be the most effective possible civil servant that you can be with the tools that are available. But I guess the short answer is yes, I did always feel until it came to this issue and this time that there was space for that sort of discussion, and those discussions happened a lot.
And I remember you saying also in the letter that you had decided when you joined the PM, you said, I felt the harm I might do I made the promise that I would stay as long as I felt the harm I might do could be outweighed by the good I could do. That's what you had said. Yeah. So I guess my next question, one thing I was doing when I was listening to all of your interviews and kind of doing the research for this conversation is following a thread, and I think it was a lovely way to end my research was to read the letter in full and get a real sense of like the person behind this act that everyone is talking about, not just the act itself. And one of the threads that I had followed was the press briefing, the White House press briefing that happened on October 19th, right after you had written this letter. And I believe it was like a third of the questions or more were about you speaking up. And one of the things, and I have a quote that Matt Miller had said, is he said, "We understand, we expect, we appreciate that different people working in this department have different political beliefs, have different personal beliefs, and have different beliefs about what United States policy should be." He said that he thinks one of the strengths of our government is that we have different opinions and we honor those opinions and we encourage them to make their opinions known. And he said, of course, it's the president that sets this policy, but we encourage everyone, even when they disagree with our policy, to let their leadership be known. Now, you and I are both communications people in different ways, so we know that there's a certain narrative that is told when these major events happen to the public. And there's a certain narrative that Matt Miller had to sort of give to make sure there was a conversation and an open channel between yourself and what had happened in the public and the press. So my question about his statement then is, it seems like what he's talking about is how it should be, right? In terms of channels of dissent within the State Department, in terms of civil disobedience within the civil servant population. And that's kind of the way our country and its democracy, part of how it was founded was within that channel of dissent, right? The ability to question, argue, and to make things better. But it seems like from what Matt Miller is saying, it's almost the exact opposite of what you had said and what your account was in this particular instance with Israel. Can you just talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's a fair amount to unpack in that too, right? And let's just start quickly with the policy-making piece of this, because as you said, the president sets the policy. And that's certainly true. But I think we also have to understand the role of the civil service and of the bureaucracy within government in setting policy. The United States, as a government, makes literally tens of thousands of policy decisions every single day. And when it came to the portfolio I was working in, the United States reviews and authorizes something in the order of 30,000 different arms transfer cases every year, and an arms transfer case can be anything from 1,000 guns to 20 fighter jets. So 30,000 of those decisions every year. It's not like President Biden is sort of sitting in the East Wing late at night and looking through and thinking yes, no. These responsibilities are delegated in any modern government to the Secretary of State, and then from the Secretary of State onto those within the department who are responsible for them. And so there are policy decisions that we all make on a regular basis. It's also the case that, again, the president does set policy. When it comes to my portfolio, the policy the president set is something called the Conventional Arms Transfer Policy, which is sort of the guiding framework that we are supposed to work within, and which, one of my main complaints has been set aside here. That policy, for example, says that we will not transfer arms, or it says the transfer of arms shall not be authorized when it is more likely than not they'll be used to commit human rights violations or to increase the risk of human rights violations. So first of all, if the president sets policy, let's stick to the president's policy. I think more broadly, Matt Miller is right that there is a lot of space for debate and dissent within the State Department, and it does make us stronger. Because it leads to better policy, because people come with expertise, with experience, and with bureaucratic equities as well, that all impact the policymaking process and result theoretically in a much better set of policy decisions than in systems where you don't have that, where in systems where you are told from the top down, and I'm thinking here of Russia, for example, this is the policy, this is what you'll execute, don't ask any questions, don't raise your voice. I think the American process, the Western and the democratic process, does lead to better decision making. And I think that's why we now see ourselves in such a bad situation in terms of American foreign policy when it comes to our actions to continue to support Israel's military operations in Gaza. When we see ourselves isolated at the UN, when we see our partners in the Middle East sort of recoiling from us, when we see the global South calling us hypocrites when it comes to how we speak about Ukraine versus how we speak about, Palestine, I think part of the cause for all this, all these problems is that the policy discussion has been shut down within the department when it comes to this issue. So again, I think Matt is broadly correct, but we clearly have a problem here, and we can see the impacts of it playing out, unfortunately.
Yes, when I was listening to him, and I was I think it was the very first interview perhaps you had done with PBS, and I'm not sure what the journalist's name was. Something I listened to as well as a communications person, as I listen to moments where people are struggling with their speech, because I always think, oh, there's something really juicy here that I want to uncover. And something that he had said, and I transcribed it. He asked, finally, you have deep experience in the region. You have connections throughout the region. Do these connections drive your opinion on this? And I had mentioned before, I thought your answer was really good. You didn't necessarily, sidestep the question, because Amy Goodman asked you a similar question. But what you said was that it gave you a passion for human rights, being in that region, right?
Yeah.
And I think this was before I realized your background in Iraq and Palestine. But looking into your letter a little more, and sort of like some other influences you've had that we haven't talked about, you mentioned having met Yuri Avneri in your letter. And I'm wondering if you can tell us more about your time, or what was that meeting, what transpired. And just to let everyone know, Yuri Avneri is the Israeli founder of the Gush Shalom Israeli Peace Movement, which was a landmark, very important movement and group. I believe I don't know if it started, but what I had read was within the 60s and 70s, but obviously was after that as well. So I'm just really curious what that meeting was like.
Yeah, so I was in Israel over the summer of I think it was 99. I was doing my master's thesis, which was on counterterrorism and civil rights, specifically in Israel, and how, what are the legal underpinnings of civil rights and counterterrorism in Israel, and those actually go back to the British Mandate, and we can have a whole talk about the British impact not only in Israel, Palestine, but other places as well. So I was talking to a number of judges in Israel. I talked to actually the former head of the Shin Bet, the Israeli Internal Security Service. I talked to Palestinian Israelis, lawyers, and a couple of people said to me, "Oh, you should really go talk to this guy Uri Avneri," who I didn't know, but I looked up, and as you say, was founder of the Israeli Peace Movement. So I gave him a call. And he said, "Yeah, come over." So I went to his apartment in Tel Aviv and sat in his kitchen, and we had a wonderful 2-hour or so conversation where he was, obviously we were mostly talking about the current day as it was then, and, the balance or lack thereof between counterterrorism and civil rights in Israel. But he started to tell me about himself, and he told me the story of how, as a young man, he had been part of something called the Irgun, which was a pre-Israeli Zionist militant movement that was fighting the British at the time in the 1930s. And he told me in order to push them out, in order to create an Israeli state. And he told me about a meeting. He said once, I'll paraphrase his story. He said, our commander called us down to our secret meeting place in a basement in Tel Aviv, and said, "Look, this was in 1939. Britain has gone to war with Germany, and the Germans are, going to kill millions. Wait, I don't think he said millions, but they are going to kill many Jews. Hitler, hates us, but our enemy is still the Brits, and we are going to keep fighting them. And if anyone has a problem with that," the commander said, He can get up and walk out right now, thinking that no one's going to have a problem with it. And Uri Avneri got up and walked out. And that story has always stayed with me, and I can still sort of see, he had, at this point I met him, he must be in his 70s, and had white hair, white beard, and sort of these twinkling blue eyes. And I can still see the pride in his eyes as he told that story. So that was one of the many influences, I think, on my career and on my thinking about dissent.
Yes. Do you feel like it influenced your time in the Bureau? That one meeting?
Well, I think it certainly influenced my resignation. And obviously, I refer to him. I also refer in my resignation to a Palestinian Israeli who I met during the same period, who also has memory of whom has stayed with me, but who I haven't described because he is, unlike Uri Avneri, still alive, and I wouldn't want to put him in danger. But I think both of these people have made me think, as arms transfers for Israel have come across my desk, which they have repeatedly. What would they think? What would they do? And then certainly, as I say, when it came to my resignation, Avneri's example of getting up and walking out when you have to was certainly one that stuck with me.
Yeah, I'm curious if other people have that drive, within these roles, or how does that transpire? I guess my other question, it kind of branches off from something that Amy Goodman had asked you before, and we already went over this, I know, so you don't have to repeat yourself with part of it. But she had asked you sort of like about like your moral compass, like just like Uri did, right? Like the moment when you decided to quit, and how things shifted for you. And she had sort of brought up some other things that were you had mentioned, morally challenging, morally compromising, morally perilous work of arms transfer of its very nature. And again, after reading your letter, kind of could get a sense of like the layers of what you're going through as you're doing this work. But, she had brought up also instances where sort of like the weapon sales with Saudi Arabia, who's notoriously known as like a authoritarian government. And even in the one case, the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi, would later it said that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, was responsible for this. So this, I would imagine, and you had mentioned in another interview, like you've been through 4 administrations. I don't know if they've all been through the PM, but you've seen a lot, right?
Yeah.
And you've seen a lot, but you still had some area or some agency to make change, perhaps in the way that I kind of know you to be now as someone who wants peace. So yeah, I'm just curious if you could talk more about that moment as compared to perhaps some other times when you felt like you were morally challenged in the work you were doing.
Yeah, so I think my approach generally, and obviously this my resignation is an exception to it, but generally has been incrementalism. I think that the U.S. government is a massive beast, and you can't change it overnight. You have to chip away, and it can't just be you. You have to be one of many chipping away to make change, both through how you vote and then also through how you work as a civil servant and whatever other opportunities present themselves. There's a painting actually in the National Gallery here in DC. I can't remember the artist, called "Hope is Wanting to Pull Clouds," and it's this massive painting I go and look at sometimes, where it's this guy sort of lassoing a cloud and trying to pull it. And of course, you can't, but you can try, and you can, I guess, do your best. And I think that's what I've tried to do. And this goes back to what you were saying about doing more good than harm. In any arms transfer, as you say, there is moral peril, and some more than others. So if we're talking about, the transfer of, communications equipment to the British Army, probably not too much moral peril there. Although I guess we can debate that too. But on the other hand, if you're talking about munitions, lethal munitions to Israel, for example, right now, a lot of moral peril. And so in any of these, there is always the risk of how is the partner, how is the country going to use them once you've provided them. And so that is something that I and others in the department, of whom there are many who care about human rights, have always taken seriously and have always tried to hash through. And what you're really trying to do is raise the concerns and also see if there are ways to minimize the potential harm. Ideally, sometimes the answer might be there's no way to minimize the harm. This shouldn't happen. But in my experience, even when you lose those battles, the argument you make to yourself, or at least that I've made to myself, is, well, I've raised these issues. There were some things that were done. I didn't win in the end, but I will raise them again. And if I'm not here, no one else will raise them in some cases. Or at least, the longer I'm here, the more I can chip away. The more sort of the closer I can pull the cloud. So I think that's sort of the theory of the case when it comes to, and I think that probably applies to many jobs in government. Again, looking just at the US, it's such an enormous undertaking, the US government, that touches lives in so many different ways. And of course, I saw this, first and foremost on the ground, for example, in Iraq, which was one of my first jobs. It was actually my first government employment job, where, people are sort of pulling threads or pulling strings in Washington, and people are dying, on the ground. And people you're working with are being assassinated, are being blown up, are being threatened, are having their children kidnapped, are having their children killed. And so I think it's impossible to sort of live in that sort of environment and not think about the consequences of your actions when you come back to DC.
Yeah, I think what you're saying here is really important, this sense of, and I love that you're here on the intersection because you're in the middle of all of it. But one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on is even if people have very good intentions, like on social media or different conversations or events, there seems to be like a disconnection between what people are saying, sort of like the decisions they're making and the repercussions they're having, which sounds like kind of what you're talking about with these strings that are being pulled. So I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the sort of inner workings. And I have to say that October 19th press briefing was quite good because, you sort of set the world on, so you set it on fire, but like you definitely set like the media on fire where they had more, they had a lot more, fodder to like ask some of these really good questions because of the things that you had brought up. And so some of the inner workings, and listening to the legal podcast that you were part of too, I have a little bit more of an understanding now. But someone had asked, about the Leahy Amendment, and was this applying to Israel when military aid was being vetted? So part of this is about the checks and balances question is if the U.S. does provide munitions to Israel or to other countries, isn't it their responsibility to know how it's being used, which I know you already said that. The questions had to keep getting finer and finer because I felt like they were being averted. But the one question that this person had asked is, do we comply with all applicable congressional statutory requirements and regulatory requirements in our provision of military assistance to Israel as we do to every other country in the world? And so, my question is what are your thoughts in what you saw with how some of those transfers went and what the repercussions were and what the checks and balances were and the provisions set up to protect civilians?
Yeah, good questions. I mean, I think I want to start with something you were sort of alluding to at the start of that question, which was the question of intent. And, I really, it's a cliche, but it's so true that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think at the end of the day, no one goes into government, or I'd like to think, no one goes into government to do harm. Everyone goes into government to do good, both for the American people, also for the world. But actions have consequences, and it doesn't really matter what you intend at the end of the day. If you don't intend for U.S. Lethal arms, for example, to be used to kill civilians, but they are being used to kill civilians, if you don't intend or if you intend to be providing Israel with security, but you're not actually providing Israel with security. Intention is important, but it is not the only thing that matters. Outcomes are actually what matter. I think we need to pay close attention to outcomes. And that's true as well when we are applying the laws and regulations and policies, for example, in the arms transfer world. You raised the question of Leahy vetting. Your listeners probably are familiar with that, but it is a requirement in law that we cannot provide security assistance to any unit or individual who is credibly alleged to have been involved or implicated in a gross violation of human rights, which includes things like torture, rape, forced disappearance, extrajudicial killing, which is a technical fancy way of saying murder. And this is a law that is applied to any recipient of U.S. military assistance. And typically the way it's applied is that before someone receives U.S. taxpayer-funded military assistance, they are vetted, whether it is a unit that is being vetted, whether it is an individual who's coming to the U.S. for training. There's a whole process to look into their background and ensure that they are not credibly alleged to have committed a gross violation of human rights. When it comes to Israel, the process works differently. And the way the process works here, and the theory of the case is, look, we provide so much money to Israel, so much military assistance to Israel, we would have to vet everyone before we provided any assistance, and that's just not practical. So we'll provide the assistance first. And then there's this thing called the Israeli Vetting Forum, where we sort of keep our ears open for potential allegations of gross violations of human rights and bring them into that forum and discuss them, debate them, and then theoretically come to a conclusion and say, okay, this unit should not be provided assistance. We've never actually said under this process, any Israeli unit or person should not be provided assistance. So it's a different process. And yes, I do worry that it is not compliant with the way, certainly not with the spirit of the law, but also perhaps not with the letter of the law if we are indeed providing military assistance to units that are committing gross violations of human rights. But I think, this is also comes down to, so I think it comes down to that question you asked about, it's not are we applying our laws, but are we applying our laws as we do with every other country in the world? And there the answer, I think, is clearly not. There is a different approach. And I think the answer is not, as some people will say, look, you're holding Israel to a higher level than you hold anyone else. I don't think that's right, but I think we do hold Israel to a different level than everyone else. And I think what we need is the same standard for everyone. And ideally, that should be the highest possible standard.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because I don't quite understand the reason for that. Some other press briefings that I heard recently, it seems like it's kind of a dance that's always happening between, Matt Miller and the press, because they ask him a lot of very specific questions and he doesn't answer. And then they keep asking, and typically
it's a hard job.
I'm sure it's a hard job. I don't want to just get down on him. For me, as a communication person, it's just interesting for me to kind of see what's going on there. But,
the way it works, it's not, I mean, Matt certainly is a very good spokesperson. And it is ultimately, his face, on the words. But of course, there's a lot of work that goes in on a daily basis, every single day behind the scenes of, okay, what are the questions we think Matt could get asked?
Yes,
what are the
I'm
answers?
sure.
And, the answers are hashed out at length within the bureaucracy, which of course results in, perhaps the least possibly satisfying answers because everyone has had to agree to them before he goes out and delivers them. I mean, I
think the fact that they're being asked is good, right? Because a lot of times the answers are in the questions.
Yeah.
But a later press briefing, someone had brought up evidence of human rights crimes. And this is starting to transition and bridge into our topic in the intersection between trans people and Palestinians. It's the human rights crimes that he had named was, I'm not sure the number of people, but there is footage of Israeli soldiers or military kind of like trotting out. I don't know if they're prisoners of war or what, but they're like not wearing anything and they're sort of walking, and then they have them in these, different shapes or something. I mean, it's this strange thing happening where it's clear that this is this is a way to humiliate these people, right?
Yeah.
And so someone had brought that up, and it had just happened and just been released. And I think, Matt's comment to that was like, we don't know what's going on. And I've seen a lot of other content of other things happening. Like, I don't think I wrote it down, but it was someone else who there was a raid in a theater in, I don't know if you had heard about this, in a camp. And the person was handcuffed and sort of humiliated, beaten up badly. And then there was sort of like these pictures that were taken in poses with the soldiers, kind of like this trophy,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure other things like this are happening. So, like, I guess what I'm wondering is if Leahy vetting is something that the countries have to go through, or that we have to put in motion in order to transfer arms and give our support, and this evidence is sort of clear in small ways and in bigger ways, how these things don't like connect for me.
Yeah.
So how can that legally be happening?
So, I mean, I think the short answer is, one would hope, right, that the department is collecting all of these examples and is pushing them into the Leahy vetting process that on the back end will then end up suspending, a whole bunch of Israeli military units. I suspect that won't happen, but I'd be delighted to be proven wrong. I think it's very important, and you keyed in on this word humiliation, and that has been a tool of the Israeli government in the occupied territories for many years. And, of course, when we're talking about the picturing of, as you refer to, these videos of men who had been stripped down to their underwear, of course, the picturing of prisoners of war is a violation of the Geneva Conventions, first of all. But, of course, we see humiliation as well when it comes to the checkpoints that exist around the West Bank, where women are patted down, the elderly, and of course there is a humiliation that is happening too. You started off by talking about the deaths in the Gaza conflict of 8,000 children, 5,000 women. Of course, many innocent men as well as being killed. And of course, within that Palestinian culture, there will be a significant humiliation factor of not being able to defend and to stand up for their families as well, that will leave a lasting mark on so many people. Humiliation is a very, I don't want to say effective weapon, because I think it often backfires badly, but it is a very utilized weapon of those in power when it comes to how they treat the powerlessness. It serves to remind people of that imbalance of power, and I think remind both those in power as well, which I don't know what kind of sick pride one gets from that. But it is a tool that we see used not only, of course, by Israel, but by police forces in the United States.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. So I think that question and that issue of humiliation is a really sort of important sort of clue, as it were, as to what is actually being communicated there, which is not that there is some, utility to it in a military sense. There's no military utility to humiliation. Quite the contrary, right? Every lesson we know from warfare is that you treat your hostages well. You treat, this is Machiavelli. You treat the prince as a prince in order to secure their friendship. So the humiliation is what it is showing you there. It is speaking to sort of the darker side of the psychology and this sort of sense of empowerment and sort of will to impose powerlessness.
Yeah. Talking about that a little more, I think we can start to head to talking about bodily autonomy, integrity, and integrity itself, which is a part of human rights. And it sounds like from the Geneva Convention that you were talking about, the law that they have there, that this would be in violation of that, right? Bodily autonomy is part of this, conversation in a way too. Bodily autonomy is defined a little differently, but I do think it has to do with what you're talking about in the checkpoints, the occupation, kind of the humiliation, the gendered humiliation that's happening, the aged humiliation that is happening. When we talk about bodily autonomy, we think about a person's ability to make their own decisions in relationship to their body, right? We talk about Bodily integrity is a little different. It talks about people's exclusive use and control over their body. And when we talk about, sort of like personal autonomy, bodily integrity, we often think of reproductive rights, sexual freedom, rights to privacy. But bodily integrity really has to do with a person having control over their physical and mental well-being. So it's more of an umbrella term.
Yeah.
Trans people not being able to have access to healthcare and being free from acts of violence certainly rings true to what Palestinians have been going through for a long time. And with respect to war, just the right to one's life. You had mentioned in the Middle East Eye that what is happening in Ukraine and certainly in Palestine is an existential problem, whereas what happened to Israel is not an existential problem, although it may feel, because I have family members who are Jewish, and my cousin's daughter was actually flying to Israel when all of this happened, and her flight got diverted. Good. So I have ties there in a way, and I have people who have a very emotional response to what's going on, and I understand that intergenerational trauma from Jewish people and that connection to Israel. But when we get down to the actual facts, as you had said, this is not an existential crisis, even though it may feel like one. But for Palestine now and for Ukraine, it is. With respect to war in terms of integrity, we think of the right to protect one's life, the respect, prohibition of torture and ill treatment, which we just talked about, is happening. You had mentioned in the Middle East Eye Big Picture podcast that every person has a right to safety. This is actually what made me think of what the topic of this show would be. A life free from harm or threat of harm, and a safe home, not just the Israelis, which we know that there's some conflict that happens there on the side of the Palestinians, and what had happened on October 7th as well, but also the Palestinian people. Right. So I wonder if you can comment more on that. Is this something that, there's a lot of questions I want to ask. So, but is this something that is sort of on the minds and hearts of people who are in your role or people that you work with? How do you work with these infractions, and how do you try to, get the State Department to do better in our part in all of this?
Yeah, so I think when you say bodily autonomy, I think in certainly the political military mindset, I think self-determination. And those are sort of two sides of the same coin. And the right to self-determination is something that we think about a lot within the State Department. And Ukraine is an obvious example of that. I think we failed to apply it to the Palestinians in the same way. And of course, Palestinians are one of several stateless nations around the world, right? There's the Kurds as well. There is the Uyghurs in northwestern China. There are, so there are multiple communities that do not have the capability or the right to self-determination because they are not within this national framework. We've also thought and spoken a lot about bodily autonomy in the context of Afghanistan. And, I think that's a really interesting one because we sort of, went into Afghanistan and tried to impose this more westernized approach. And I think, I am someone who speaks very much from a liberal Western perspective. I believe in liberal Western values, which include the equal value of every individual and the equal rights of every individual, including women, obviously. And I think we are right to see women, in that way, and to have pushed Afghanistan to create more women's rights, to bring women into the workplace, into the schools. Of course, now that we've pulled out from Afghanistan, the Taliban have come back in and are just are killing thousands, are, reintroducing child marriages, are, removing the rights of so many women. And we've just sort of abandoned them in that context. And I think a lot of people in the State Department, I know a lot of people in the State Department continue to really struggle with that decision-making set. which on the one hand, gives Afghan back to the Afghans. Obviously wasn't taken for that reason. It was taken in order to sort of free up forces and resources so that we could focus on, quote unquote, the big problems in the world. But in doing so, have sort of, left millions of children and of women to the wolves, frankly. So I think this is a problem set we do wrestle with in many different contexts around the world as the United States. And I think this is, these are all examples, or many of them are examples of where our values are divorced from our practices. If we believe in self-determination in Ukraine, we should believe in it in Palestine. If we believe in bodily autonomy, and we certainly push for it in many countries around the world, including, for example, in Latin America, then we should stand up for it in Afghanistan. And okay, we stand up for it vocally and say, bad Taliban, don't do that. But of course, we're the ones who created the situation in which they're now able to do that. So I think there's a lot to churn over there.
Before we get to, I do want to talk about the LA Times article that you wrote recently. But before we get to that, I want to go back to the press briefing that I keep talking about that happened right after you released your letter. There was a reporter with the name of Saeed, whom I really liked. He asked a lot of very, very smart questions. And after he had asked a question about lethal weapons not being used against civilians and making sure civilians have a safe place to go, he sort of just was a little frustrated and just said, what is Israel's end game in all of this? And it seemed, again, that we have an existential problem with everything that's going on. It was also an existential question. There was this script that followed that I've heard repeated in the media. And I know you probably already know what it is, a rhetoric that Israel had a right to protect themselves. And the thing that Matt Miller said is it's not just a right, but it's an obligation as a democratic nation to do that, right? But you had said earlier in another interview that, the United States also has an obligation to guide the way in the best way to do that, right? So, yeah, I guess my question is Israel a democratic nation, and in what way is it? And how can the script just keep, some of this is just rumination, but how can the script keep repeating? Because, I visit my mom and I listen to that show, The View, with the, Whoopi Goldberg, and these women are on there and they're sassy and they're talking about political affairs. And even I was just shocked that one of the women in there said, we know a lot of civilians are going to be killed, or she didn't say that, but she said a lot of women, we just got to do it. We've got to do it to get rid of Hamas. There was no humanity there. So the script is very strong. This narrative, this rhetoric is extremely strong in that it is convinced so many Americans that this is what we should be doing. This is our role. So before I ask you what is a better way, which I want to hear your perspective on in the LA Times article, I want to get your perspective on what you just talked about is we should know better, right?
Yeah.
If we demand bodily autonomy in this one way, or we talk about individualism or something like that, then we should also demand it in the U.S. for reproductive rights, in Afghanistan and for women. Right. How can this be happening? What is your opinion about that?
Yeah, no, I like your questions, because each question has about 5 questions in it that I want to touch on.
That's the way I process.
But there are a few things you hit on there, and I want to start where you started with. Saeed Erekat is his name. He's a reporter he's a Palestinian-American reporter for Quds News. And he's wonderful, as you say. But I think what's interesting, what's really wonderful about having him there is that, the Palestinians don't have a voice, right? They don't have a voice at the UN. They don't have a country. Within America, their voices are frequently shut down. And yet here you have Saeed Erekat every day at the State Department press briefing, asking questions directly to the State Department for all the world to see, which I think is a symbol of what American democracy and freedom of speech can be, and how empowering it can be. And Saeed certainly uses it, to the full extent, very effectively. Is Israel a democratic nation? I think that's a really complicated question. It has elections. It has a political system which isn't probably the most effective or well structured, but does produce elections. Doesn't always produce governments. But the question is who can participate in that. And of course, Israel, a country of about 8 million, rules over about 6 million Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, plus another 1 to 2 million Israeli Palestinians. If those in the West Bank and Gaza over whom it is ruling do not have a voice because they are being occupied, is it really a democracy? At the same time, I think we have to recognize that Israel does have some of the strongest human rights for its citizens of any country in the Middle East when it comes to, for example, freedom of speech, when it comes to, and Israel has an active NGO community that exists because it has freedom of speech. When it comes to Israeli NGOs, when it comes to Palestinian NGOs, a lot of them are sort of shut down or, people are thrown in prison. So there is that disconnect there, and there is the two systems within the one country, which is one of the reasons that I labeled it apartheid, as Amnesty International has, as Human Rights Watch have, in my resignation letter. Because if you have two systems under one system of government, one for one group, one for another, that is an inherently non-democratic apartheid system. So it's a complicated question. And then to get to the back end, you talk about people saying, well, look, Israel has to do whatever it takes. No country would ever accept October 7th. As I said in Middle East Eye, no country would also accept October 6th. And of course, the fact is that history did not begin on October 7th. And I think one of the fascinating things about the Middle, you can always tell what someone's position is going to be on the Middle East conflict, on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, by what they choose as their start date for the story. Is the start date October 7th? Is the start date 1948? Is the start date 1919 and 1927, the Balfour Declaration? Is the start date?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Josh. Can you talk about October 6th just a little to inform our listeners?
Yeah, no, just in the sense that, by October 6th, already that had been the deadliest year for Palestinian children in the West Bank. At that point, 42 had already been killed by either Israeli forces or by settlers. Of course, the system of checkpoints, the expansion of the settlements, the siege on Gaza, all of these were in place, and people were suffering deeply already, or not already, but had been for many years on October 6th. That's what I'm referring to there. So again, I think the history, where you start the history matters. And then, of course, there are two very different histories, regardless of where you start that history.
And had something happen on October 6th? Because I heard you talking about that in another podcast where you had said that there was a policy shift. Something had happened to make those the border crossings stricter, or to not allow in certain things.
Well, right. I mean, so this was, if you go back to October 6th, the day before Hamas's attack, again, this was the day in which the Defense of Children International-Palestine, a charity in the West Bank, had announced that the year to date had been the deadliest so far. It was the same day that Israeli settlers rioted in a Palestinian village called Hawara in the West Bank, shooting a 19-year-old in the chest. It was the same day that Israeli Minister Smotrich went to that town and said we should shut down this town and build a highway around it. It was the same day that the Washington Post announced that Israel was suspending the importation to Gaza of donkeys, and donkeys being had become the main method of moving goods within Gaza because fuel had already been, greatly constricted. It was the same day that Al-Anadolu, one of Turkey's main news agencies, announced that, Palestinians were desperately trying to get out of Gaza because there was no future for them there, no life for them there. And I think, honestly, you could pick any other day of the year and you would find a similar collection of stories, a similar collection of settler riots, a similar collection of Palestinian civilians being shot dead in the West Bank, a similar collection of sort of the trials and tribulations of the people of Gaza. So I think every single day in this timeline is its own set of horrors, is its own atrocities. And so I think that is when we talk about centering the humanity of people, and this sort of really comes to your question here about, saying, well, Israel needs to do whatever it can to defend itself and however many that takes. At the core of that is this dehumanization of the Palestinians. And like humiliation, dehumanization is another tool that those in power effectively use, essentially to make it okay for people to say, for 700 Israeli dead civilians, there can be however many thousand dead Palestinian civilians there need to be for it never to happen again, because somehow these are not the same. Somehow, one of these counts for 20 of these. It's the same sort of language that says, as the president of Israel did, that, everyone in Gaza supports Hamas, which first of all is not true. And therefore, they are, implying that they are all our enemy, to speak for Israel. It's the same sort of, and so, language that paints Palestinians as terrorists and has done for years and years and years, and therefore implies that it is okay. It's the same sort of language, that talks about, well, they voted for Hamas, therefore they are somehow liable for Hamas's actions, even though that vote, their last election in Gaza was in 2006, and these 8,000 children who have died since then certainly did not vote in that election. And of course, it also comes down to the media and how the media reflects and shows different cases, different people. There have been repeated, lengthy interviews with survivors of October 7th, with the families of hostages, talking about the suffering, the real suffering that they have faced. There has been nowhere near as much focus on the families of Palestinian children held by Israel, for example, or of people in Gaza and what they're going through. There's just an imbalance that I think also contributes to this dehumanization of Palestinians that makes it okay for people to think that Palestinian lives don't matter as much as Israeli lives.
And I think we can go into like a domestic, conversation
Yeah.
here, just thinking about the invisibility of Palestinians and their suffering in mainstream media.
Right.
I mean, you have to really look hard to find these individual stories coming through in terms of also, the equivocation of Palestinians and Hamas, which I find very disturbing. Meaning, and also in the U.S., racial profiling that happens might be compared to checkpoints or sort of like a threat of brown skin or black skin being seen as just a threat, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's another form of dehumanization when people are seen as a threat or more threatening based on the color of their skin. Another form of, the same sort of thing we're talking about is when people talk about the gay community or the trans community and use the word pedophiles. It is exactly the same thing as talking about Palestinians and using the word Hamas, essentially. It is an attempt to tar a whole community with something that will outrage people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it does seem what the the far right and the right do is they'll take one little sliver, one little soundbite that will that is alarmist, that will enrage, that oftentimes is grossly incorrect and offensive, and make that right their whole campaign.
And I think what's at the core there, if I may,
go ahead,
is just that there are certainly logical fallacies that have been known since the time of the Greeks that get trotted out when people don't have a rational argument to make. And one of the most effective of those is the appeal to emotion.
Yes.
That if you can't convince people based on the facts, if you don't have a good argument, you appeal to their emotions. You keep, for example, playing over and over again what happened on October 7th. And you hope that sort of traumatizing imagery then, grinds people up to say, yes, we must do anything we can to stop that from ever happening again.
And that is kind of like a trauma-inducing response. Yeah. I mean, this is how cults start. And, you had mentioned there was a statement on Christiane Amanpour's show about Hamas, something that was really striking for me. You had said that Hamas will be ruling as long as the Palestinians don't have security, that they can succeed as an independent nation and people. And so I'm going to I know you said I'm asking too many questions all at once, but I'm going to connect that to the LA Times article that I read recently, which I thought was excellent, where you attempted to map out and this was one of my questions, is like, what is the alternative? If people have this horrible dehumanizing script, like we must do this in order to, rid the area of Hamas, what is the alternative? And you had attempted to map that out in that LA Times article, and you had talked about how Israel is very much a nation state, and Palestine is not. Meaning, and I'm quoting you, Israel gets to decide its own aims and actions, and the PLO's status as the representative of an occupied people with little capacity beyond day-to-day governance of a shrinking territory. You went on to talk about how this imbalance might be corrected and how there might be a peace process that might be putting back on course. And I don't know how much of it was speculative and like theory, and how much of it is like, we can actually do this now, or it's going to take 20 years. I wasn't quite clear on that, but you had talked about the US, rather than just, providing arms to Israel indiscriminately, which it seems indiscriminate, that, this is a very different idea, but endorsing Palestinian statehood and a membership application for the United Nations Security Council. And that would set a different precedent, right? And hopefully change this, the threat that Israelis are feeling, the threat that many Americans are responding to in the atrocities of October 7th. So I did want to hear more about that, because to me, when I think of dissent, when I think of truly good, progressive, like you said, American liberal work, like there are action steps. Whenever I present something, I have action steps to my clients and so on. And without those action steps, it's just like chaos. It's emotion flying around. It's reactivity. So I would love to hear more about that article and what you had said there.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really interesting question in the context of our discussion, and I'll have to think about how it relates to the US domestic context. But what I'm talking about there is essentially power dynamics. So the Oslo process, as it was established in the 90s, was essentially established to create a pathway, as it were, to a Palestinian state. And that was the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. And the way it was set up, essentially, Israel as the occupier, the Palestinians as the occupied, who then had to prove themselves worthy of statehood. That's what Oslo does. It basically looks at the Palestinians and says, there is a route to statehood here. You need to prove yourselves worthy. And the people who will judge that will be Israel. As it happens, Israel has never, come to an agreement that Palestinians have proved themselves worthy. There's never been agreement on any of the major negotiating, what they call the final status negotiations, status of Jerusalem, status of borders, settlements, etc., etc. Part of the reason for that, as we have heard Prime Minister Netanyahu just say this fall, is that, he is proud of always having opposed and blocked the emergence of a Palestinian state. And we've now heard multiple Israeli senior officials go public and say, we do not accept the existence of a Palestinian state. So the question is how do you then come to a peace process if that pathway has proven to be ineffective, if there has been no way for the Palestinians to quote unquote prove themselves worthy? And in this context, at least, in many power dynamics, there is no clear solution. In this context, there is actually, because the decision of whether or not there should be a Palestinian state is actually not up to Israel. It is up to the UN. And the only thing stopping the UN from fully recognizing a Palestinian state is the United States. So we could wake up tomorrow morning, President Biden could wake up tomorrow morning and say, you know what? The United States recognizes the state of Palestine. Hey, UN, please bring them in as a full member. Now, that will not solve all problems, right? But what it means is that suddenly you have two actors who have parity under international law. And that, in this context, is significant because you don't have that right now. You have a nation state and you have an occupied people. Under international law, however, once you are both nation states, suddenly cross-border attacks become invasions. suddenly disputes about, who can overfly the land? What about the bandwidth and, the sort of radio frequencies can be brought to international agencies that are there to arbitrate these sort of discussions, along with multiple other arbitration mechanisms that are binding under international law and that have consequences if they are broken in a way that, again, the relationship between an occupier and occupier doesn't. So that's sort of what I was getting at there, is that not that, and I don't know if the two-state solution actually ends up being the lasting peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I suspect, honestly, it doesn't. But I think if you don't start with those two states parallel and with parity in international law, you'll never move the ball forward. And I think that's what the last 20 years have shown.
And what do you think? I remember reading that in the article too. You said this is a good start. What do you think, kind of thinking of the more optimistic question and answer that Saeed had asked, what is Israel's end game? What is perhaps a positive end game that would be more in your vision of autonomy, statehood, integrity?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things working particularly in the West Bank taught me is I think we have a psychological glitch in American psychology that every problem has a solution. And if you just throw enough resources at it, think hard enough about it, work hard enough on it, you can solve it. And I think, as it turns out, there are some problems that don't have solutions. And I think the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of them. But I think, given that, our role should be, and the way we should approach this, is not to find the solution, but to create opportunities for solutions to emerge, solutions we might not be able to see now, solutions that might not be available now. I think what you have to do is create space and create, a fertile enough ground that in the future those solutions might emerge. And so that's sort of, I think, one way of getting to that.
And I think in terms of the domestic question that you had asked, which I think is a good point, the same way of what you're talking about here in this solution, or maybe the start to the solution, is that legislators don't really understand the existential crisis of trans people, of brown and Black communities, and so on. And so that would seem to be the number one, most important thing, is like, we do exist. We should have autonomy. And that same way that people that you said Palestinians had to prove themselves, that they were worthy of statehood. I feel like many marginalized communities, we have to prove ourselves just to be somewhere, my Black friend who got this very fancy job and moved into a high-rise building, and she's very often confused for like a courier or something like that in the elevator, something like that, or trans people having to prove themselves to make to do gender affirming care. So that is a connection I just wanted to make there, and thank you so much for answering that question. I know it's a big question, but I did feel like the article was also had a lot of big ideas that I wanted to understand a little more about. We're almost out of time. So at the very end of these conversations, I always have my guests tell me, since this is something we created together, and hopefully you felt like that, and it was a conversation we had, not just a traditional interviewee situation, is what is a takeaway you have from this conversation? What is your main takeaway?
So I have a main takeaway, and then I want to add something on the.
Oh, definitely! I would love that thing you're going to add.
Okay, I mean, my takeaway is that there are some real commonalities here, in terms, and I think what this is all about ultimately is power dynamics. Whether you're talking about Israel-Palestine, whether you're talking about racial issues in America, whether you're talking about gender and sexuality-based issues in America, it's all about power dynamics and how do you disrupt that power dynamic, right? And the power dynamic may impose humiliation. It may impose dehumanization, or use dehumanization and humiliation as ways of establishing itself and reinforcing itself. And I think, you disrupt those things, I think in the Palestinian context, by working to rehumanize, to focus on that equal value in every life, by working to remove that humiliation by pointing to pride, pointing to beauty, and showing the strength that is there in that community. And I'm sure that a lot of those same lessons and same thoughts apply, again, within the US domestic context or any sort of power dynamic context. So I think that's my takeaway, and I will go away and think about that a lot more.
Beautifully put.
Yeah, no, thanks. But I think it really is at the core of it.
Yes, no, I would agree. So thank you so much, Josh Paul, for being on this podcast. Josh Paul, previous director of Congressional Public Affairs Bureau of Political Military Affairs, who's better known in the public as the State Department official who resigned in October in protest of the Biden administration funding arms to Israel. Thank you again for being here. We really appreciate you.
Well, thank you. And let me also just close with a pitch to any of your listeners. As I've said, there are a lot of really hard decisions within government, but also a lot of really fascinating decisions. And those decisions are not made by the president. They are made by hardworking, good-hearted individuals across government. And we need more diverse voices in government. We need more views, more perspectives, more thinking. So for any of you out there, I would certainly encourage you, primarily I would say at the State Department, it's a fantastic place to work and to see the world. But any part of government, it's really a unique opportunity to do good every single day. And I hope you think about that, Griff.
Thank you so much, Josh Paul.
Thank you very much indeed for having me.